The silence inside the bridge of the Venerate was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a ship that knew it was about to die. Outside the thick viewport, the stars were blotted out by the swarm. They were Xylanth ships, dark and jagged shapes that looked like they were carved from black stone. They moved together, like a school of predatory fish circling their prey. Captain Ryu stood at the center of the bridge. He was a member of the Ithel, a bird-like species. His feathers were usually a bright and fluffy blue, showing his high rank and good health. But now, his feathers were pressed flat against his body. He looked small and thin in his chair. His hand shook slightly as he gripped the armrests. Around him, the crew of the Venerate moved with frantic energy, but there was no hope in their motions. They were running diagnostics that they knew would fail, and charging shields that had already buckled. "Shields at 10%, a young officer at the back shouted. His voice was high and cracking with fear. "Hull breach in Sector 4. The drones cannot seal it fast enough." "Evasive maneuvers are useless," the pilot said, sounding tired. "They are too fast. They know exactly where we are weak." Captain Ryu closed his eyes for a brief second. He thought of his home planet. He thought of the wide, blue skies and the soft winds. He would never see them again. The Xylanth did not take prisoners. They hunted for resources and for the thrill of the kill. To them, the Ithel were just soft meat. A tremor ran through the floor. The ship shook violently. Alarms began to scream. A harsh red light washing over the white, pristine bridge. Another impact. They were being toyed with. The enemy could have destroyed them hours ago, but they chose to shoot the engines, disable the weapons, and let the fear grow. "Captain," the communications officer said. Her voice was very quiet. "I am picking up a transmission. It is from the Xylanth flagship." Ryu opened his eyes. "Put it on the screen." Static filled the main view for a moment, then cleared. A face appeared. It was insectoid, with large black eyes and a mandible mouth that clicked and snapped as it spoke. It had no nose, just two slits, and its head was covered in a hard shell. "Aethel vessel." The Xylanth commander hissed. The sound was like metal scraping on metal. "Your resistance is amusing, but it is boring now. Prepare to be boarded. Your biological matter will be recycled." The screen went black. Ryu took a deep breath. He looked at his crew. They were looking at him, waiting for an order, waiting for a miracle. But he had no miracles left. He had protocols. "Prepare self-destruct sequence," Ryu said. His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. "We will not let them take us." The crew froze. It was the ultimate order. It meant death for everyone, but it was better than what the Xylanth had in store. "Yes, Captain," the pilot whispered. Just as the pilot reached for the destruct panel, the communication officer turned around in her chair. Her face was pale, her feathers trembling. "Captain," she cried out. "I am receiving a signal on the emergency band. It is not coalition encryption. It is coming from deep space." Ryu frowned. "Ignore it. It is probably a ghost signal from the battle." "No, sir," she insisted. "It is strong. It is on the frequency we were told never to use. The forbidden frequency." Ryu felt a cold shiver go down his spine. Every captain in the Galactic Coalition knew the stories. There was a sector of space that was marked on all star maps as a danger zone. It was a place inhabited by a species called humans. They were called Deathworlders. They came from a planet with high gravity, terrible diseases, and constant war. They were said to be violent, unpredictable, and terrifyingly strong. The Coalition had a treaty with them, or perhaps a non-aggression pact. No one went there, no one contacted them, but they were out of options. Death was certain. The Deathworlders were just a myth, a scary story told to young cadets. "Open a channel," Ryu said. "Text only. Do not use voice." The officer typed quickly. "Channel open, sir. I've sent the SOS. It just says, under attack. Please help. Coordinates attached." The bridge was silent again. Everyone stared at the communication console. They counted the seconds. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The Xylanth ships were getting closer. Their weapons were glowing. charging for the final shot. 5 minutes passed. They are ignoring us, the weapons officer said sadly. Then, a light flashed on the console. A message had arrived. The communication officer stared at it. Sir, I do not believe this. Read it, Ryu commanded, standing up. It is very short, sir, she said. It says, packet size zero point 0.01 tons. Stand by for intercept. Ryu blinked. Intercept. What packet? Suddenly, the sensors began to scream. Detecting an object approaching at high speed, the tactical officer yelled. It is moving incredibly fast. It is not a ship. It is a projectile? Where is it heading? Ryu demanded. It is on a collision course with us. Ryu watched the main sensor screen. A small dot was zooming toward them. It was moving so fast that it was burning up in the thin dust of space. It was going to smash right into the side of the Verret. Had the Xylanth fired a missile they hadn't seen? Brace for impact, Ryu screamed. The crew grabbed onto their consoles and ducked under their seats. The object grew larger on the screen. It was a small, rough shape, dark gray. It wasn't a missile. It had thrusters. At the very last second, the object fired its thrusters in reverse. The engines flared bright blue, fighting against the immense momentum. The small craft groaned and shuddered as it slowed down. It missed the Venerate by just a few meters, swung around the hull, and hovered near the main cargo bay airlock. There was a loud clang that vibrated through the entire ship. Magnetic locks engaged. The object had attached itself to the hull. What is happening? Ryu whispered. Sir, the sensor officer said, his voice shaking. It is a drop pod. A single-person drop pod. And the signature? It matches the database for human technology. The bridge was silent for a long moment. They had sent an SOS into the dark, and a single human had arrived. Not a fleet, not a squad, just one. Open the cargo bay airlock, Ryu ordered, though he wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. But keep the internal blast doors closed, and have a security team meet me there, armed. Ryu walked out of the bridge. His legs felt weak. He didn't know if they had just made a terrible mistake. The Xylanth were still outside, probably confused by this new arrival. But for now, the firing had stopped. He reached the corridor that led to the cargo bay. 6 security officers were waiting there. They held plasma rifles, but their hands were shaking. They were police officers, not soldiers. They had never seen real combat. The heavy blast door to the cargo bay hissed. The light above it turned from red to green. The doors slowly began to slide open. Inside the cargo bay, the small drop pod sat on the floor. It was smoking slightly, and the metal was scorched from the heat of re-entry, even though there was no atmosphere here. The friction against the shields had been intense. A ramp lowered from the front of the pod with a heavy thud. Steam hissed out from inside. Ryu and the guards raised their weapons. They aimed at the opening in the smoke. A heavy boot stepped onto the ramp. Then another. A figure emerged from the smoke and walked down the ramp. He was tall, much taller than an Uthal. He was wearing a bulky, dark gray suit of armor that looked old and scratched, covered in patches and welding marks. It wasn't sleek like Coalition armor. It looked thick, like a tank. The figure wore a helmet, but he reached up and unlatched it. He pulled it off and tucked it under one arm. He was a human male. He had short black hair that was messy. His face was pale, with tired eyes and a small scar on his chin. He looked around the cargo bay, blinking the bright lights out of his eyes. He didn't look at the weapons pointed at him. He just looked annoyed. He wiped some sweat from his forehead, looked at Captain Ryu. The human man's eyes were dark and intense. "Which one of you is Ryu?" the man asked. His voice was deep and rough. He spoke the common trade language perfectly, but with a strange accent that made it sound hard and sharp. "I am Captain Ryu," Ryu said, trying to keep his voice steady. The human sighed. He reached into a pocket on his chest armor and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. He looked at it, then looked back at Ryu. "You sent the message," the human said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ryu said. We are under attack by the Xylent fleet. We hoped. Yeah, the human interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. The bugs. I saw them on the sensors when I dropped in. Nasty little ships. Too many of them for one ship, even for one of yours. Ryu was confused. This was the legendary Deathworlder, the terrifying warrior of the stars. He looked like a tired mechanic. If you cannot help us, Ryu started to say, then why did you come? The human laughed. It was a short, dry sound. I didn't say I couldn't help. I'm just complaining about the commute. The human threw his helmet onto the floor of the cargo bay. It clanked loudly. He adjusted the heavy pack on his shoulder and stretched his neck, making a cracking sound. All right, the human said. I'm Jun. You sent for a weapon, right? Ryu nodded slowly. We sent for assistance. We sent for assistance. We sent for assistance, scary guys from the dark sector, Jun said, cutting him off again. He walked past the line of security guards, who were too scared to shoot. They stepped back, lowering their rifles as Jun walked by. You got a weapon. You got me. Jun stopped in front of Ryu. He looked down at the captain. Up close, the size difference was intimidating. The human was dense, heavy with muscle. Ryu could smell the scent of oil, sweat, and something sharp like ozone coming off him. So, Jun said, looking around the pristine white corridor of the Venerate. Where's the mess hall? I've been in that pod for 6 hours. I'm starving, and I need coffee. Do you have coffee? Ryu blinked. Coffee. Ryu blinked. Coffee. Lack. Hot. As much as you have, Jun said. Then we can talk about blowing up the bad guys. The bridge crew watching in the cameras couldn't believe it. The monster they had feared was asking for breakfast. But the Xylent ships outside were beginning to move again, their weapons charging. They didn't know what Jun was, but they were about to find out. The walk to the mess hall felt like the longest walk of Captain Ryu's life. He walked quickly, trying to match the pace of the human named Jun. But Jun moved with a strange, rolling gait, heavy and confident, despite being in a foreign ship. Ryu had to almost jog to keep up. The security guards followed at a distance, their weapons still ready, but held low. They were terrified. Every myth they had ever heard about Deathworlders was running through their minds. Ryu glanced at the back of Jun's head. The human was whistling a low, discordant tune. It sounded like a funeral march, but he whistled it casually, as if he were walking through a park on a sunny day. The contrast between the tune and the red emergency lighting flashing in the corridors was disturbing. We have a cafeteria on Deck 3, Ryu said, his breath short. We can synthesize food. It is not what you might be used to on Earth. Jun didn't turn around. I don't care what it tastes like as long as it has calories. And I asked for coffee. Don't tell me you don't have coffee. We have a nutritional beverage that is chemically similar, Ryu offered weakly. Jun stopped in the middle of the hallway. He turned slowly, and his eyes locked onto Ryu's. The security guards froze. Jun's face was expressionless, but his eyes were cold. Coffee, Jun said. Real coffee. Beans, roasted, ground. Hot water. If you give me that brown nutrient sludge you people drink, I will throw this cup through your hull. Ryu swallowed hard. We have a stash. For diplomats. I will have it brought to the cafeteria. Jun nodded once. Good. Lead the way. They arrived at the mess hall moments later. It was a large room with rounded walls, filled with tables bolted to the floor. Usually, it would be full of crew members eating and talking. Now, it was empty except for a few medics who were treating wounded crew members on portable beds. They stared in silence as the massive armored figure walked in. Jun ignored them. He walked to a table near the window, swept a stack of data pads onto the floor with one heavy arm, and sat down. The chair groaned under his weight. Lieutenant Han, a young logistics officer, hurried over to the table. He carried a tray with a steaming pot and a large mug. His hands were shaking so badly that the liquid in the pot rippled. "Here," Han said, placing the tray down in front of the human. "It is real coffee. As requested." June grabbed the mug. His hand was huge, the skin rough and scarred. He drank the entire mug in one long gulp, without even checking the temperature. He slammed the mug down on the table and let out a loud sigh. "Better," Jun grunted. He poured another cup. "Now, let's talk." Ryu stood on the other side of the table. He felt exposed. "Talk about what?" "The Zillinth," Jun said, leaning back. He tapped the thick armor on his chest. "I looked at the tactical readout on my way in. 3 destroyers, 1 heavy cruiser, and a bunch of those little swarm ships. They have you surrounded." "Yes," Ryu admitted. "We are out of options. Our engines are dead. Our weapons are almost depleted." June took a sip of coffee. "Why didn't you run?" "We tried," Ryu said. "They are faster. They hurt us." Jun nodded. "Typical Zillinth behavior. They like to play with their food." Ryu felt a spike of anger at the human's casual tone. "We are dying out there. My crew is dying. And you sit here drinking coffee. Are you actually going to help us, or are you just watching the show?" Jun looked at Ryu over the rim of his mug. For a second, the amusement vanished from his face. He looked tired, very tired. "Relax, Birdman," Jun said. "I didn't come all this way to watch bugs blow up a tin can. I'm here to work." Jun reached down to his feet and grabbed the heavy duffel bag he had been carrying. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud that made the silverware rattle. He unzipped the bag. Ryu and Han leaned forward, curious despite their fear. They expected to see a high-tech rifle, or perhaps an explosive device. They didn't expect to see a pile of metal parts. June pulled out a large mechanical object. It looked like a gauntlet, but it was incredibly bulky. It was made of dark, dull metal that seemed to absorb the light. There were thick cables running out of it, connected to a heavy power pack that looked like it belonged in a starship engine, not on a person's arm. "What is that?" Han, his eyes wide. Jun began to assemble the pieces on the table. He moved with practiced speed, twisting bolts and connecting cables. "This is my tool. It's a kinetic amplifier, gravity manipulator, plasma cutter, all wrapped into one." He slid his left arm into the gauntlet. It hissed as the seals locked tight around his forearm. The metal band looked heavy, but June lifted his arm easily. He pressed a button on the side of the pack. The gauntlet hummed. A low sound, like a transformer charging up. The air around the gauntlet began to shimmer, distorting the light. "It runs off a microfusion cell," Shun explained. "It allows me to hit things much harder than I should be able to, and," he pointed a metal finger at the table, "it lets me tear through reinforced hull plating like it's paper." "Why do you need that?" Ryu asked. "The Zillinth are boarding ships. We have small arms." John laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. "You have stun bolts and laser pointers. Those things might sting a Zillinth warrior, but it won't stop them. You have to peel them." He flexed his hand inside the gauntlet. The metal fingers clenched into a fist, making a hydraulic whine. "On my planet," Jun said, staring at his fist, "we used to hunt animals much bigger than us. Bears, elephants, things that could step on you and crush you. We didn't have lasers. We had spears. We had bows. And we had brute force." He looked up at Ryu. "That's what this is, brute force. The Zillinth rely on speed and numbers. They don't know how to handle something that is just stronger than they are. Something that is meaner." "But you are one man," Han said softly. He looked at the gauntlet, then at John. "Even with that weapon, there are hundreds of them on the ship already." John stood up. The table creaked as he pushed away from it. He attached the heavy power pack to a magnetic clamp on his back, running the cable to his arm. "I know," Jun said. He looked towards the door of the mess hall. "I can hear them." Ryu listened. At first, he heard nothing. Then, faintly through the thick metal walls of the ship, He heard a skittering sound. It was the sound of many sharp legs scraping against metal. The Xylanth were boarding. They were cutting through the airlocks. They are in the ventilation shafts, June said calmly. They are coming for the bridge. We have to evacuate the bridge. We have to evacuate the bridge, Ryu shouted, panic rising in his chest again. No, June said. He started walking towards the door. You go to the bridge. You sit in your chair. You look confident. If you run, your crew will panic. If they panic, they die. What are you going to do? Ryu asked, blocking the path. June stopped. He looked down at the captain. For the first time, Yoon's face showed a hint of a smile. It was a sharp, predatory smile. I'm going to the hallway, Jun said. I'm going to meet our guests, but they will kill you, Han cried out. Jun stepped closer to Han. The human towered over the lieutenant. Jun reached out and patted Han on the shoulder. His hand was heavy, like a rock. Kid, Jun said softly, look at me. Look at this armor. Do you think I'm afraid of a few bugs? Han looked into Jun's eyes. He saw no fear. He saw nothing but a calm, cold focus. It was the look of a predator who had just woken up and was ready for the hunt. Go, Jun commanded. Get to the bridge. Seal the blast doors. Do not open them until I say so. Ryu nodded slowly. He grabbed Han's arm and pulled him back. Come on, Lieutenant. Let's go. Ryu and Han turned and ran towards the bridge access elevators. They looked back once. June was standing in the middle of the mess hall, alone. He was rolling his head on his shoulders, cracking his neck. The gauntlet on his left arm was glowing with a soft, dangerous orange light. The lights in the mess hall flickered. The skittering sound grew louder, coming from the walls. A vent cover near the ceiling crashed to the floor. 3 Xylanth warriors dropped down. They hit the ground with a wet thud. They were about 7 feet tall, covered in black chitin, with mandibles dripping green acid. They hissed, sensing the soft meat in front of them. They raised their spike rifles. June didn't run. He didn't take cover. He just sighed. Finally, June said, I'm done waiting. The doors to the mess hall slid shut, separating Ryu from the fight. The last thing Ryu saw before the doors closed was June lowering his head and charging at the monsters. The heavy metal doors of the mess hall slid shut with a final hiss, cutting off the view of the human. Captain Ryu stood in the corridor for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of impact from behind the door, followed by a high-pitched mechanical whine. Captain, we have to go, Lieutenant Han said, tugging at Ryu's sleeve. His eyes were wide with panic. Ryu shook himself out of his trance. He turned and ran for the elevator shaft, Han and the 2 remaining guards following close behind. The ship shuddered again, a violent tremor that threw them against the walls. The Xylanth were not wasting any time. Bridge. Ryu commanded the elevator. The small compartment shot upwards. Did you see his face? Han whispered, leaning against the wall for support. He wasn't scared. He was smiling. He is a Deathworlder, Ryu said, though the words felt strange on his tongue. They do not think like us. They do not fear death the same way we do. But it was 3 against 1, Han insisted. Those were Xylan shock troopers. They have armor that can withstand plasma bolts. Ryu looked at the young officer. Then we better hope his tool works. The elevator doors opened, and they rushed onto the bridge. The atmosphere here was even more chaotic. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the consoles. Sparks flew from a damaged panel near the tactical officer, filling the air with the smell of ozone and burnt plastic. Report, Ryu shouted as he took his chair. The Xylanth had breached decks 4 and 5, the tactical officer yelled, her voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. They are moving fast. They are not fighting for control points. They are heading straight for the reactor and the bridge. It is a suicide run. Can we seal the bridge blast doors? Ryu asked. Already sealed, Captain, the pilot replied. But they are cutting through. They have plasma torches on the outer hull. They will be inside in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Ryu looked to the main view screen. The Xylan ships were still out there, firing occasionally at their defenseless ship. They were waiting. They knew the boarding parties would finish the job. It was a clean, efficient way to kill. "Is there any update on the passenger?" Ryu asked. He couldn't bring himself to say the name. The communications officer shook his head. "Internal sensors in the mess hall are offline. We can't see anything." "Put the audio on the main speakers," Ryu ordered. "I want to hear what is happening." The officer tapped a few keys. The bridge went silent as the crew leaned in to listen. At first, there was only static. Then, a loud crash came through the speakers, sounding like metal crumpling. It was followed by a strange, wet sound, like a boot stepping in mud. Then, a roar. It was not a human voice, or at least not a speaking voice. It was a scream of pure exertion and rage. The crew flinched. There was the sound of gunfire, but it wasn't the sharp zap of plasma rifles. It was a rhythmic thumping sound, like a heavy hammer hitting a piece of meat. Thud, thud, crack. Then, silence. Did he win?" Han asked quietly from the back of the room. Suddenly, a voice came over the speaker. It was calm and breathless. "Hey, Bird Captain, you there?" Ryu hit the reply button on his console. "I am here, June. Status report. Clean up in aisle 4, June said." There was a sloshing sound in the background, like he was walking through water. 3 bugs down. Mess hall is a wreck. You guys are going to need a new floor." A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but Ryu held up a hand to silence them. "They are breaching the lower decks, Jun. They have numbers. Can you stop them?" "I'm working on it," Jun said. "I'm heading to the main elevator shaft now. I'm going to meet the rest of the party." "How many are there?" Ryu asked. "Sensors show about 50 on board," the tactical officer whispered. 50? Jun's voice crackled over the speaker. Ryu could hear the smile in his voice. "Is that all? I've had workouts that were harder than this." The connection cut out. Ryu stared at the console. He could not imagine fighting 50 Xylanth warriors. He could barely imagine fighting one. And this human was treating it like a morning exercise routine. "Captain," the tactical officer called out, "I have movement on the security cameras in the corridor outside the bridge. The blast doors are glowing red. They are almost through." Ryu felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Even if June was fighting downstairs, the group at the bridge was almost inside. "Prepare for close quarters combat," he ordered. "Use sidearms. Aim for the eyes." "Prepare for close quarters combat," he ordered. "Use sidearms. Aim for the eyes." The bridge crew drew their small pistols. They were weapons meant for self-defense, not for war. Their hands shook as they held them. The metal blast doors began to glow white-hot in the center. A circle of metal melted away, falling inward with a splash. Smoke poured into the bridge. Through the hole, Ryu could see the black, shiny eyes of the Xylant. They were screeching, a high-pitched noise that hurt the ears. One of them squeezed its head through the hole, its mandibles snapping. "Fire!" Ryu yelled. The crew fired their pistols. Blue plasma bolts hit the creature, singing its chitin, but it didn't stop. It pushed harder, widening the hole. 2 more warriors forced their way in behind it. Ryu fired his pistol until the battery clicked empty. It was useless. The creatures were too strong. They were inside the bridge. Suddenly, the elevator doors at the back of the bridge chimed. The Xylanth warriors paused. They turned their heads toward the sound. The doors slid open. June stood there. He was covered in green slime and black soot. His armor was scratched, and a piece of his chest plate had been torn away, revealing a black undersuit. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving up and down. "Room service," June said. He looked at the 3 Xylanth who had breached the bridge. They hissed at him and raised their weapons. June didn't reach for a gun. He held up his left arm. The gauntlet was still attached, humming with power. "Try this," Jun said. He punched the air in front of him. The gauntlet released a shockwave. It wasn't a bullet. It was a blast of pure force. The air rippled like a stone thrown into a pond. The shockwave hit the three Xylant and slammed them backward. They flew across the room and smashed into the bulkhead with enough force to dent the thick metal. They slid to the floor, broken and limp. The bridge crew stood in stunned silence. Jun walked into the room. He stepped over the melted metal on the floor. He looked at Ryu. "You people really need to lock your back door," Jun said. He tapped a button on his gauntlet, and the humming sound died down. "These guys are fast, but they are fragile. If you hit them hard enough, they shatter." Ryu looked at the crumpled bodies of the aliens. He looked at Jun, who was wiping green blood off his faceplate. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him. The human wasn't just a fighter, he was a force of nature. "Is the ship clear?" Ryu asked, his voice trembling. "Not yet," Jun said, walking to the tactical console. He looked at the screen, scanning the red dots. "There are about 40 more on the engineering deck. They are trying to blow the reactor. Can we stop them?" "We." Jun shook his head. "No. You stay here. You keep the shields up if you can. I'm going down to the engine room. I'm going to finish this." Jun turned to leave. He stopped at the elevator door. He looked back at Han. "Hey kid," Jun said. "You got any more of that coffee?" Han blinked, surprised by the question. I can bring it to the engine room." "Don't bother," Jun said. "Just have it ready when I get back. I'm going to be thirsty." The elevator doors closed, taking the monster away to fight the war in the dark depths of the ship. Ryu let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for hours. The bridge crew was looking at him with a mix of fear and awe. "He is incredible," Han whispered. "Yes," Ryu said, looking at the empty elevator. "He is incredible. But I fear what he will do when the killing is finished." The elevator ride down to the engineering deck was slow and silent. Jun leaned against the back wall, listening to the hum of the machinery. He checked the readouts on his gauntlet. The power cell was at 80%. It was enough for what he had to do. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. He could smell the faint scent of his own sweat and the metallic tang of the recycled air. It smelled like any other ship, any other battlefield. He had been doing this for a long time, too long. He remembered the lush green forests of Earth, the smell of rain on hot pavement. He missed it sometimes. But out here, among the stars, there was only work. The elevator stopped with a jolt. The doors slid open, revealing a scene of chaos. The engineering deck was a large, open space filled with massive pipes and thrumming engines. But now, it was a war zone. Steam burst from ruptured valves, creating thick white clouds that hid the floor. The sound of metal cutting on metal echoed through the room. The Xylant were here, and they were angry. Jun stepped out of the elevator. He didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He walked into the center of the room, his heavy boots clanking on the metal grate floor. "Come out, you ugly bugs!" Jun shouted. His voice boomed through the steam. "I've got a schedule to keep." The steam swirled. Shadows moved within it. From the mist, a dozen Xylanth warriors emerged. They were larger than the ones on the bridge. These were the elites. Their armor was thicker, covered in spikes and trophies. They held heavy cannons that looked like they could tear a tank apart. They hissed in unison, a sound like grinding gears. They recognized him. They knew he was the threat. Yoon smiled. He cracked his knuckles inside the heavy gauntlet. "Let's dance." The first warrior fired. A bolt of superheated plasma screamed through the air. Jun didn't dodge. He threw his left arm up. The gauntlet's energy shield flared a bright blue, absorbing the shot. The impact pushed him back a few inches, but he held his ground. "My turn," Jun said. He charged. He moved faster than a creature his size should be able to. He closed the distance to the nearest warrior in 2 strides. The Xylent swung its heavy claws at him, aiming for his head. June ducked under the swing, the wind of the attack ruffling his hair. He drove his fist into the warrior's stomach. The gauntlet glowed bright orange. The kinetic amplifier released a burst of energy. The Xylent's armor, which could withstand bullets, shattered like glass. The warrior flew backward, crashing into a control panel and exploding in a shower of sparks. The rest of the pack swarmed him. They came from all sides, claws slashing, guns firing. Yude was a blur of motion. He was a dancer of death. He punched one, kicked another, used the heavy weight of the gauntlet to smash a third. He fought like a man possessed. There was no grace in his movements, only efficiency. Every strike was calculated to break bone or rupture armor. A warrior managed to grab Jun from behind, its claws digging into his shoulder armor. Jun roared in annoyance. He reached back, grabbed the creature by its neck, and flipped it over his head, slamming it into the floor. He stomped on its head, ending the fight instantly. Steam filled the room, making it hard to see. The sounds of battle were deafening, the screech of the aliens, the roar of the gauntlet, the crunch of chitin. Jun was breathing hard now. His heart was pounding in his chest. A thin line of blood ran down his forehead from a glancing blow, blinding one eye. He wiped it away with his gauntlet, smearing green blood and red across his face. There were still too many of them. For every one he killed, 2 more seemed to crawl out of the vents. They were endless. He was getting tired. Suddenly a loud siren began to wail. It was the reactor alarm. June looked up. Through a gap in the steam, he saw the main reactor core. It was a massive cylinder of glowing blue light, and standing next to it was a Xylent Praetorian. It was huge, nearly 9 feet tall. It was placing a strange device on the glass of the reactor. It was a bomb. "No, you don't," June growled. He started running towards the reactor. The remaining warriors tried to block his path, but June didn't stop. He smashed through them, using his gauntlet like a battering ram. He threw enemies aside, not caring if they were dead or alive. He had eyes only for the Praetorian. The Praetorian turned. It saw June coming. It let out a deafening roar and raised its staff, ready to fight. June didn't slow down. He activated the thrusters on his boots, a small feature he rarely used. They gave him a burst of speed. He launched himself into the air, flying towards the giant alien. The Praetorian swung its staff. It caught Jun in the side, sending him spinning out of control. Jun crashed into a wall, denting the metal plating. Pain flared in his ribs. He groaned and struggled to stand up. The Praetorian marched towards him, raising its staff for the final blow. Jun looked at the bomb on the reactor. The timer was counting down. 2 minutes. He couldn't fight this thing and stop the bomb. He had to choose. He looked around the room. He saw a large gas main pipe running along the ceiling above the Praetorian. It was labeled flammable gas. June smiled despite the pain. "Hey, big guy," June wheezed. The Praetorian paused, confused. Jun didn't aim at the monster. He aimed his gauntlet at the pipe above its head. "Catch," Jun said. He fired a plasma bolt from the gauntlet. It wasn't a shield blast, it was a cutting beam. The beam sliced through the metal pipe effortlessly. A jet of highly flammable gas sprayed out, covering the Praetorian and the warriors around it. The Praetorian hissed, trying to wipe the gas from its eyes. June pulled a flare from his belt, a simple chemical flare used for signaling. He struck it against the ground until it ignited with a bright red spark. "Barbecue time," June said. He tossed the flare into the cloud of gas. The explosion was massive. A fireball roared through the engineering deck. The heat was intense, even for June. The shockwave blew out every window and ruptured every pipe in the room. The fire consumed the Xylent warriors instantly. The Praetorian screamed as the flames melted its armor, then fell silent. Yoon threw himself behind a reinforced blast shield just in time. He curled into a ball, covering his head, as the fire swept over him. When the flames died down, the engineering deck was a charred wreck. Smoke hung heavy in the air. Most of the Xylenth were gone, burned to ash. June stood up. His armor was smoking. His shoulder pad was gone. He was covered in black soot. He coughed, waving the smoke away from his face. He walked over to the reactor. The Praetorian was dead, a smoldering heap on the floor. The bomb was still there, ticking away. There were 30 seconds left on the timer. June looked at the complex locking mechanism. He didn't know the code. He didn't have the tools to defuse it. Well, June said to the empty room. Plan B. He grabs the bomb with his gauntlet. The metal of the device groaned under his grip. He pulled the bomb off the reactor casing, tearing the wires out of the wall. He turned and ran. He ran for the airlock that led to the exterior of the ship. He moved faster than he ever had before. 15 seconds, he counted in his head. He reached the airlock. He punched the manual override button. The door groaned open. He threw the bomb inside the small chamber and slammed the button to close the door. 5 seconds. He turned his back to the airlock and braced himself against the wall, covering his head with his arms. The explosion was muffled by the airlock walls, but it was still powerful enough to shake the entire ship. The floor beneath Jun jumped. Lights flickered and died. The blast door to the airlock bulged outward, holding strong. Silence returned to the engineering deck. The red emergency lights came back on, bathing the room in a bloody glow. Jun exhaled slowly. He sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall. He looked at the destruction around him. Burnt bodies, ruined machinery, shattered glass. It looked like hell. He tapped his comms unit. It was damaged, but it still worked. "Hey, Captain," Jun rasped. His throat was sore from the smoke. "You there?" Ryu's voice came through instantly. "Jun, we felt the explosion. Are you alive?" "Define alive," Jun croaked. "Engine room is secure. The bugs are dead. The reactor is, well, it's a bit messy, but it's holding." There was a pause. Then cheering erupted on the other end of the line. "Great work, Jun," Ryu said, sounding relieved. "Come back to the bridge. We need you." Jun looked at the mess around him. He was exhausted. Every muscle in his body ached, but he wasn't done yet. He looked out the viewport of the airlock. The Gielond ships were still out there, circling like sharks. "Yeah, I'm coming up," Jun said. "But I'm not done yet. The ones outside look a bit lonely." Jun pushed himself up from the floor. He picked up his helmet from the ground where he had dropped it earlier. He placed it on his head. The heads-up display flickered to life, showing his oxygen levels and weapon status. He walked back to the elevator, leaving the graveyard of the engineering deck behind him. The easy part was over. Now, he had to go back out into the void. The elevator ride back to the bridge felt longer than the trip down. June stood alone in the small metal box, watching the numbers light up as he ascended. He was covered in soot, oil, and the green blood of the Xylanth. His armor was scratched and dented, and a piece of his shoulder plating was missing. He looked like he had been dragged through a rock crusher backwards. He felt tired, deep down in his bones. But there was a familiar buzz in his veins. The adrenaline was still pumping. He was not done yet. The doors slid open and the bridge crew turned to look at him. The room was quieter now. The alarms were silent. The red emergency lights had stopped flashing, replaced by the calm, steady white glow of the backup generators. The crew looked at him with a mix of horror and awe. They saw the destruction on his armor and the blood on his face, and they knew he had saved them. Captain Ryu walked over to him. The awful captain looked shaken but relieved. "The engineering deck is secure," Jun said before Ryu could speak. "The reactor is stable, but I wouldn't push it too hard. The Xyanth on the ship are all dead, every last one of them." A cheer went up from the crew, but Jun silenced them with a wave of his hand. He walked to the main viewport and looked out into space. The Xelan fleet was still there. The dark, jagged ships were drifting silently, waiting. They were confused. Their boarding parties had not returned, and their sensors were probably picking up the internal damage on the Venerate. "You did it," Ryu said, coming up beside him. "We can make the jump to hyperspace now. The engines are repaired enough for one jump." Jun shook his head. "No." Ryu looked at him, confused. "No, we can escape. We are alive." They are still out there, June said, pointing at the view screen. Look at them, they are regrouping. If you run now, they will chase you. They will hunt you down. And next time, they won't send just a few ships, they will bring the whole hive. June turned to face the captain. He unhooked the heavy power pack from his back and placed it on the floor with a loud thud. I don't run, June said, and I don't like leaving a job half-finished. What are you going to do? Ryu asked, a tremor of fear in his voice. You are one man. You cannot destroy an entire fleet. I'm not going to shoot them with bullets, June said. I'm going to hit them where it hurts. I'm going to take out their command ship. If I kill the Queen, the hive dies with it. The bridge crew stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious, Han said from the tactical station. That is a battleship. It has shields that can withstand nuclear blasts. Jun picked up his helmet. Maybe. But their shields don't work against kinetic impact if you hit them hard enough. And I have a full charge on this pack. He walked toward the airlock door at the back of the bridge. Keep the ship steady. Don't fire your weapons. Make them think you are dead. As they target you, you move. Jun, Ryu called out. You will die out there. Jun paused at the door. He looked back at the alien crew. I've died before, kid. It didn't stick. He stepped into the airlock. The heavy door sealed behind him. He stood alone in the small chamber, facing the outer door. This was the dangerous part. He wasn't in a ship. He wasn't in a mech. He was just a man in a suit, about to step into the cold vacuum of space to fight a fleet. He engaged his magnetic boots. He checked his oxygen levels. 90%. Good. He tapped the controls on his wrist. The outer door slid open. Space was silent. It was a beautiful, terrifying void of blackness and stars. The cold bit into his suit instantly, fogging up his faceplate for a second before the heaters kicked in. Below him, the hull of the Venerate stretched out. Jun walked to the edge of the hull. He looked up at the Xylent command ship. It was massive, hanging in the sky like a dark moon. Its weapons ports were glowing, charging for another shot at the Venerate. Hey, Jun whispered to himself. Nice day for a walk. He looked down at the gauntlet. He had never used this setting before. It was a gravity jump, a prototype modification the techs on Earth had installed. It was meant for zero-G combat, allowing him to launch himself between ships like a living missile. It was dangerous. If he missed, he would float in the void forever. He aimed the gauntlet at the command ship. He locked onto its gravity signature. Here goes nothing, Jun grunted. He pulled the trigger. The force was incredible. It felt like a giant hand had punched him in the back. Jun was launched off the hull of the Venerate at blinding speed. The stars streaked past him in long lines of light. The sound of his own heartbeat roared in his ears. He was flying through space, a tiny projectile aimed at a giant beast. The Xylent command ship saw him coming. Its point defense guns swiveled to track him. Red lasers lanced out, cutting through the space he had just occupied. Jun twisted his body in midair, using his thrusters to dodge. A laser beam singed his arm, melting the outer layer of his armor. But he kept going. He was getting closer. The ship grew larger in his vision. He could see the details of the hull, the weapons emplacements, the bridge viewport. Almost there, he growled. He activated the reverse thrusters on his suit to slow down. It was too much force. His ribs cracked under the deceleration. He screamed in pain, but he didn't black out. He slammed into the hull of the Xylent ship, feet first. The impact dented the alien metal, but his magnetic locks engaged instantly, holding him in place. The ship was covered in sensors and gun turrets. They swiveled toward him, trying to target him at point-blank range. Too slow, Jun said. He raised the gauntlet. He didn't fire at the guns. He fired at the hull beneath his feet. The plasma blade extended, glowing with intense heat. He drove it into the ship's armor. The metal melted like butter. He cut a circle around himself. Then he kicked the piece of metal down into the ship. He dropped into the hole, landing on a catwalk inside the enemy vessel. He was in. The air was pressurized here. Alarms were screaming. Jillinth warriors were running toward him, their weapons drawn. Jun didn't stop to fight them. He knew he didn't have time. He looked at his HUD. He was in the lower decks. He needed to get to the bridge, 2 decks up. He looked up at the ceiling. He raised the gauntlet. Fire in the hole. He fired a continuous plasma beam upwards, burning through the floor of the deck above. Then the next one. He climbed up the melted holes, ignoring the Xylent fire that bounced off his shields. He broke through onto the bridge level. The bridge of the Xylent ship was huge. It was filled with hundreds of the insectoid creatures, working at consoles. In the center, on a raised platform, sat the Xylent Queen. She was massive, twice the size of the others. Her head was crowned with spikes, and her eyes glowed with intelligence. She saw him. The Queen screamed. It was a mental scream, a psychic blast that hit Jun like a hammer. His vision blurred. He fell to one knee, clutching his head. His brain felt like it was on fire. Die. Human. A voice echoed in his mind. Jun gritted his teeth. I don't think so. He forced himself to stand. He looked at the Queen. He raised his gauntlet. The power cell was flashing red. It was almost empty. He had 1 shot left. The Queen raised her staff, charging a bioelectric blast. Jun smiled. He adjusted the dial on the gauntlet to maximum overload. This was it, do or die. Hey, Jun yelled. Catch. He fired the shot. It wasn't a beam. It was a gravity pulse. It hit the Queen, not with fire, but with the gravity of a collapsing star. The blast was silent, but the effect was devastating. The Queen was crushed instantly, her body imploding under the immense pressure. The shockwave expanded outward, shattering the consoles, killing the crew, and blowing out the front wall of the bridge. The entire command ship shuddered. Its lights died. The ship went dead in the water, floating helplessly in space. Jun was thrown back by the blast. He smashed into the rear wall of the bridge. His armor sparked and went dark. His life support failed. The air rushed out of the room, venting into space. Jun gasped for air that wasn't there. The cold of space returned. He looked up through the broken wall. He could see the stars. They were beautiful. So, he whispered. This is it. His vision faded to black. Jun woke up to the sound of beeping. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy. He opened his eyes. He was lying in a soft bed in a white room. The air smelled like antiseptic and flowers. He turned his head. Sitting in a chair next to the bed was Captain Ryu. The Othil was asleep, his head resting on the edge of the bed. Han was there too, sitting on the floor, reading a datapad. Jun tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his chest made him groan. Han jumped up. He is awake, Captain. Wake up. He's awake. He jumped out of the chair, his feathers puffing up in surprise. Jun, you are awake. Jun looked at his hands. They were bandaged. He looked down. He was wearing a hospital gown. I'm not dead? No, Ryu said, smiling broadly. You are not. Your suit's emergency beacon activated. We pulled you out of the wreckage. The Xylent command ship was destroyed. The rest of the fleet scattered. They ran away. We won, Jun asked, his voice raspy. Yes, Han said. We won. Because of you. Jun let out a long breath. He leaned back against the pillows. He looked at the ceiling. He was alive. It was a miracle. That was a stupid plan, Jun said quietly. It was the bravest thing I have ever seen, Ryu said. Jun shook his head. Just doing my job. He looked at Ryu. My gear, where is it? It is in the locker, Ryu said. It is broken. The gauntlet is melted. Jun closed his eyes. I'm going to need a new one. We are in the process of transferring the credits to your account, Ryu said. The Coalition is paying the full bounty. You are a rich man, Jun. Jun opened his eyes and looked at the alien captain. Rich is good. But right now, I need something else. What is it? Ryu asked. Anything. Medicine? More food? Jun looked at them, and a small, tired grin appeared on his face. Coffee, Jun said. And make it a double.